The Arizona sun bled across the desert like a spilled fire, painting the horizon in crimson and gold. Dust curled around the hooves of a single chestnut mare, her rider cloaked in silence and shadow. The woman didn't look back, not at the endless miles she'd left behind, nor at the ghosts that trailed her like dust devils. Her name was Clara Wren, though few knew it anymore. The lawmen who hunted her had forgotten her face, and the outlaws who once called her sister would sooner put a bullet in her back than share a fire again by the time she reached Red Willow Crossing. Her horse was trembling and her canteen dry. The small town sat like a stubborn dream against the desert. One street, two saloons, a leaning church steeple, and a water tower that moaned in the wind. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers never passed unnoticed. Clara slid off her horse, her boots sinking into the red dust. A few townsfolk paused to stare. Women paused mid-sweep of their porches. Men leaned off railings, spitting tobacco. She could feel their eyes crawl over her, not with desire, but with suspicion. The wide-brimmed hat shadowed her face, but the pink scar on her jaw gave her away. It was a mark of violence, a reminder of the night she'd run from the only family she'd ever known. At the end of the street stood the Kane Ranch office, its sign weathered by sun and wind. Clara tied her horse and walked inside, hoping to find work before the day turned cold. Behind the desk sat Elias Kane, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat resting on the table beside a stack of papers. He looked up as she entered, his brown eyes calm but assessing. He was the kind of man the West forged out of stone and storm, quiet, sturdy, unflinching. "Afternoon," he said. "Can I help you?" Clara cleared her throat. "I heard you're hiring. I can ride, rope, mend fences, and shoot straighter than most." Elias studied her a moment longer, noting the worn revolver at her hip and the calluses on her hands. "You've worked cattle before." "Plenty." He nodded slowly, still unconvinced. "You alone?" Her gaze flickered. "Always." Silence stretched between them, heavy, but not unkind. Outside, the wind howled through the open door. Finally, Elias leaned back and said, "You'll find this ranch ain't for the faint-hearted. Long hours, little sleep, and no patience for trouble." "I'm not trouble," Clara said, too quickly. He gave her a look that said he'd heard that before. Then, after a pause, he said, "You start tomorrow. Cabin out by the north pasture's empty. You can bed there." Clara hesitated. "You don't even know who I am." Elias shrugged. "Don't need to. Folks earn their name by their work, not their story." She lowered her gaze, fighting the lump rising in her throat. For the first time in months, someone had offered her something, not pity, not suspicion, but a chance. As she turned to leave, she said softly, "You'll regret choosing me." Elias smiled, the kind of smile that came slow and honest. "Maybe," he said, "but I already regret letting a good hand walk out that door." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. She only nodded, tipping her hat before stepping back into the sunlight. That night, the desert wind carried the scent of rain and the distant cry of coyotes. Clara settled into the small cabin by the north fence, her horse grazing quietly outside. She ran her fingers over the worn wood of the window frame, the stillness around her unsettling in its peace. It had been years since she'd felt safe, or foolish enough to hope she might be. But even as she lay on the rough cot, sleep refused her. Memories flickered like dying campfire sparks. The face of Cole Maddox, the outlaw leader who once claimed her loyalty with a silver ring and a gun to her brother's head. The night she ran, she'd stolen something from him, something worth dying for. She still had it, hidden deep in her saddlebag. When she closed her eyes, she saw his face, heard his voice like a shadow whisper, "You can't outrun the Black Spur Gang." Clara, her hand drifted toward the revolver beside her bed. The Kane Ranch might be a refuge for now, but the desert never let its secrets stay buried for long. And though Elias Kane didn't know it yet, by choosing her, he had just invited every ghost of her past straight through his gates. Morning broke soft and gold across the Kane Ranch, turning the dew on the tall grass into tiny sparks of light. The cattle lowed in the distance, and the smell of coffee and dust filled the air. Clara Wren rose before dawn, as she always did, slipping on her worn boots and hat. She moved quietly, almost invisible, the way someone learns to when the world has hunted them too long. Her first few days passed without trouble. She worked hard, harder than most men, mending fences, hauling water, and rounding strays without complaint. The ranch hands, a rough but loyal bunch, eyed her with a mix of curiosity and respect. She spoke little, and when she did, her voice carried that low steadiness of someone used to keeping secrets. But one man watched her more closely than the rest, Elias Kane. He'd hired many drifters in his time, but none like her. She moved like a soldier, scanned the horizon like someone expecting an ambush, and slept with her revolver close enough to touch. He noticed she always chose a seat with her back to the wall during supper. Every instinct in him said she'd known danger, the kind that left marks deeper than scars. By the fourth day, Clara had earned her keep, and then some. Still, when Elias brought her coffee one morning, she stiffened like he'd drawn a gun. "Easy," he said, offering the tin mug. "You look like you've been awake since last season." Clara hesitated before taking it. "Sleep doesn't come easy out here. It's peaceful country, Elias said, glancing at the golden plains. What's got you so jumpy? Clara forced a half smile. Old habits, die hard. He studied her face, the faint line of the scar along her jaw. Well, he said quietly, whatever you're running from, this ranch has long fences and good friends. You can breathe easy here. But she didn't. That evening, as the sun sank into the hills, the peace broke. A single shot cracked through the air, sharp and distant. The ranch hands froze midst. Elias drew his rifle, signaling the men toward the north pasture. Clara's stomach turned cold. The sound came from the direction of her cabin. They found one of the fence posts split clean by a bullet. No cattle were spooked, no riders in sight, just the echo of a warning. Elias knelt, inspecting the dirt. One rider, he said, heavy horse, came close enough to scare, not to kill. Clara felt her throat tighten. She knew that kind of message. The Black Spur gang was close. They never killed outright, not at first. They liked to remind you they were coming. When Elias turned to her, his gaze sharp, she masked her fear with a shrug. Could have been bandits. He didn't buy it. Bandits don't waste bullets on fence posts. Maybe it was just a warning. He raised an eyebrow. Warning? To who? She looked away. To me. Silence stretched, heavy as desert heat. Elias didn't press further, not yet. Keep your gun close tonight, he said, voice low. Whoever fired that shot might not miss next time. After dark, Clara sat outside her cabin, staring at the dying fire. The cicadas sang, and the stars burned bright enough to touch. She thought of Cole Maddox, the outlaw she'd once loved, the devil she'd betrayed. He'd branded the Black Spur symbol on his men's gloves, a mark she'd seen on the bullet that tore her fence post. He'd found her. When the wind shifted, she thought she heard laughter, faint and familiar, carried from the canyon beyond. She gripped her revolver tighter, whispering to herself, "Don't let him take this from you too." Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned, hand still on her gun, but it was only Elias. His shadow stretched long in the moonlight. "Couldn't sleep," he said quietly. "Thought I'd check the perimeter." She nodded, her heart still hammering. "Find anything?" "Nothing but coyotes." He looked at her, his eyes soft but searching. "You sure there's nothing you're not telling me, Clara?" Her throat worked, but no sound came. "Not yet," she said finally. Elias didn't push. He simply tipped his hat and said, "Then we'll keep watch together." They stood there in silence, two souls bound by danger and dust. The night air grew colder, the fire burned lower, and somewhere, out beyond the fence line, a lone rider watched from the shadows, the glint of a silver spur catching the moonlight. The ghosts of Clara's past had found her trail dot, and the Kane Ranch was no longer safe. The morning came slow and gray, heavy with clouds that promised rain. But there was no peace in the air, only tension, sharp as barbed wire. The Kane Ranch buzzed with quiet unease. The men spoke in low tones about the bullet, the tracks, the feeling of eyes on them from the hills. Elias said little, but his jaw was tight as stone. Clara could feel the weight of his suspicion pressing against her like a shadow she couldn't shake. By noon, she was mending a section of broken fence near the riverbank when she heard Elias' boots crunch behind her. "Fence won't hold long if you don't brace it," he said. Clara didn't look up. "You always this talkative before coffee?" "Only when something's gnawing at me." She tied the last knot and turned. Elias stood there, arms crossed, that quiet authority in his stance. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he asked finally. "Nothing's going on," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. He stepped closer. "Clara, someone rode up on my land last night, fired a warning shot, and left tracks heading straight out toward the Black Spur Ridge. You expect me to believe that's a coincidence?" Her hands froze on the fence post. The name Black Spur Ridge cut through her like a knife. She hadn't heard it spoken in months, and never by anyone outside the gang. "Where'd you hear that name?" she asked quietly. "Old story," Elias said. "Used to be a gang out that way. Mean bastards. Heard they disbanded years ago." "They didn't," Clara said softly. He watched her face. "You know them." It wasn't a question, it was a certainty. For a long moment, she said nothing. The sound of the river filled the silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to ride with them." Elias didn't flinch, but his eyes hardened. "You were one of them." "I was forced to be," she said quickly. "They caught me and my brother near Dry Creek. We were starving, running from a bounty we didn't deserve. Cole Maddox, their leader, said he'd keep us alive if I worked for him. At first it was chores, cooking, mending. Then came the robberies, the killings. He made sure I saw enough blood to know I could never walk away clean." Elias's voice was low, controlled. "But you did walk away." She nodded. 2 years ago, I took something from Cole, something he'd killed a marshal to get. It's the only reason he hasn't stopped hunting me." Elias's brows furrowed. "What did you take?" Clara hesitated, glancing around as though the wind itself might be listening. Then she knelt by her saddlebag and pulled out a small oilskin pouch. Inside was a tarnished silver locket, etched with the seal of the territorial governor of Arizona. Elias blinked. "That's a government insignia." "It's more than that," Clara said. "Inside is a map. 2 gold buried by Confederate deserters after the war. Cole's been after it for years. He thinks if he finds it, he'll own every lawman west of the Mississippi. Elias stared at the locket, then at her. And you've been carrying this here under my roof. I didn't mean for the fight to follow me, she said. I just needed to rest. To forget for a while. Elias exhaled slowly, anger and sympathy battling in his eyes. You should have told me. I wanted to, she said, voice trembling. But every time I start to trust someone, they either betray me or die for it. The silence that followed was long and bitter. Finally, Elias said, You've got grit, Clara. But you don't run from a storm like this, you prepare for it. He handed the locket back to her. If Cole Maddox wants you, he'll have to come through me first. Clara shook her head. You don't understand. He'll burn this whole ranch to ash just to get even. Then we rebuild, Elias said simply. But I won't stand by while a woman pays for a past she's already escaped. For the first time since she'd arrived, tears stung her eyes. Not from fear, but from something deeper. No one had ever said words like that to her. That night, as thunder rolled over the plains, Clara sat in her cabin staring at the locket. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, until it drowned out the world. She thought of Elias, his calm voice, his stubborn courage, and she whispered to the empty room, You should have let me go. But outside, beneath the pounding rain, a rider sat on a ridge, a man in a black duster with a silver spur glinting in the lightning. Cole Maddox had found her at last. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the desert washed clean and glistening under a pale sky. But peace was a lie, a thin layer of calm over a gathering war. Clara felt it the moment she stepped outside. The air was too still, the birds too silent. Her horse, usually calm, stamped and snorted nervously. Something or someone was close. Elias Kane was already saddling his horse by the corral, his rifle slung across his shoulder. He looked up as Clara approached, his expression grim. Tracks on the south ridge, he said. 6 horses. They rode in close during the storm. Didn't take anything. Just watched. Clara froze. 6. He nodded. You know him, don't you? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Cole never rides with more than 6. It's them. Elias cursed under his breath. You're sure? I'd bet my soul on it. He studied her face, then tightened the cinch on his saddle. Then it's time we stop hiding. But Clara shook her head sharply. No, you don't understand the kind of men they are. You fight them, you won't just lose cattle, you'll lose lives. Elias's eyes hardened. I've fought worse than outlaws. You think this ranch hasn't seen men like them before? Not men like Cole Maddox, she said quietly. He doesn't just kill for money. He kills for pleasure, for control. He wants to break you before he buries you. Elias gave a humorless chuckle. Then he's in for disappointment. Clara's heart twisted. He didn't know the storm he was inviting. If he's come this far, he won't stop until he has me or the gold map. Elias's gaze softened, but his tone stayed firm. Then we make sure he gets neither. By noon, the ranch was in motion. Elias had the men reinforcing the fences, fortifying the bunkhouse, and posting guards near the northern and southern trails. Clara moved among them, silent but efficient, her presence both comfort and warning. She knew the Black Spur Gang's tricks, where they'd strike, how they'd flank, the games they played before they killed. When she passed Elias near the corral, she stopped him. They'll test you before they attack. They'll send a messenger first, someone who knows me. He nodded slowly. Then, let's hear what they have to say. Sure enough, as the sun began to sink low, a lone rider appeared on the ridge, tall, lean, dressed in a black coat and dust-choked hat. He rode down slow.com as death, until he reached the ranch gate. Clara's breath caught. Jeb Maddox, Cole's younger brother. He dismounted, grinning wide. Heard this ranch got itself a new hand, he called. Name of Clara Wren. His gaze found her instantly. Sharp and snake. Boss says you got something of his. He's mighty eager to see you again. Elias stepped forward. You can tell your boss this land's off. He wants her. He goes through me. Jeb's smile didn't falter. Now rancher, that ain't smart talk. Cole don't like folks standing between him and what's his. She's not his anymore. Elias said evenly. You got till sundown to turn around. Jeb's grin darkened. You're making a mistake, Mr. Cole don't take kindly to thieves. And he sure don't take kindly to men who hide in. Elias cocked his rifle just enough to make the message clear. You done talking? Jeb looked past him at Clara, tipping his hat mockingly. You should have stayed gone, darling. Cole's been patient, but patience runs out. Then he turned and rode off, leaving only dust and dread behind. That night, the ranch held its breath. The men slept with rifles close. The lanterns dimmed. Clara stood by the window of her cabin, watching the hills beyond the pasture. Somewhere out there, Cole was waiting, watching. Elias came to her door just before midnight. We'll move the herd east tomorrow, he said. Less cover for them that way. Clara nodded, but her eyes were distant. You shouldn't be a part of this, Elias. I already am, he said simply. She met his gaze. You don't owe me anything. His voice softened. I reckon I owe you more than you think. You came here running from your past. Maybe it's time I stop running from mine. What do you mean? He hesitated, the lantern light flickering across his face. Years ago, my brother was a lawman. Cole Maddox killed him during a gold transport raid. I've been waiting a long time for a reason to finish what he started. Clara's breath caught. Elias, he gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. Looks like fate handed me my chance. Thunder rolled in the distance again, not from the sky this time, but from hooves. Clara's pulse raced. She grabbed her rifle, stepped to the porch, and saw them, 6 riders, torches in hand, fanning out across the ridge like wolves circling their prey. Elias chambered around beside her. Clara whispered, "They're coming." Elias's eyes didn't waver. Then let him come. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of approaching riders. Flames licked the horizon. The war for the Cane Ranch and for Clara's soul had begun. The sun sank red and heavy over the desert, spilling blood across the horizon. The Cane Ranch braced for the coming storm, not of rain, but of fire and gunpowder. The cattle bawled nervously in the distance, sensing what humans could not yet see. Every ranch hand, every hired man, every trembling horse, stood waiting for the first shot that would turn dusk into war. Clara Wren stood at the corral, rifle slung over her shoulder, the brim of her hat low over her eyes. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of sage and smoke. She had seen sieges before, mining camps burned to ash, towns reduced to bones and dust, but this one felt different. This was her fault. From the main house, Elias Kane strode out, steady as ever. He wore a long duster and a revolver low on his hip. No fear in his step, no hesitation in his voice when he called out, "They'll come from the south ridge first. Stay low, keep your powder dry. Don't waste a single shot." The men nodded, their faces drawn tight. They respected Elias, not because he barked orders, but because he stood beside them, shoulder to shoulder, as if he were one of them. When he reached Clara, he handed her a second revolver. "You'll need both," he said. She met his eyes. "You should have let me go." "Not a chance," he said. "If you leave, they'll follow. If you stay, we fight together." Her throat tightened. "You don't understand, Elias. They don't fight fair. They won't stop until." He cut her off gently. "I waited too long to stand beside you. I'm not backing down now." Something in his tone, quiet, unshakable, steadied her shaking hands. As the last of the sunlight faded, a single torch appeared on the ridge, then another, then 6. The Black Spur gang had arrived. Cole Maddox rode at the front, his black coat flapping like wings, his silver spur catching the dying light. His face was sharp and cruel, the kind of beauty that turned to venom. "Evenin', Clara," he called across the field. His voice rolled smooth as whiskey, deadly as snakebite. "You've been hiding from me long enough." Clara stepped forward, her voice carrying across the wind. "You've got no place here, Cole. Turn back." He laughed, low and amused. "You forget yourself, darlin'. Everything you touch, every man who shelters you, belongs to me until I say otherwise." Elias moved beside her, raising his rifle. "You'll find this ranch doesn't take kindly to thieves." Cole's grin widened. "Thieves? Oh, I reckon we're all thieves here. You stole my gold. She stole my heart. I'm just here to take both back." With that, he raised his hand and 6 rifles fired at once. The night exploded in thunder and flame. The ranch erupted into chaos. Bullets tore through fences and splintered posts. Horses screamed and bolted into the open fields. The men returned fire, muzzle flashes lighting the dark like lightning. Clara darted toward the barn, firing from behind a water trough. Her aim was sure, her movements quicker than thought. One of Cole's men went down, another retreated behind a mesquite tree. But they kept coming, relentless, circling like wolves. Elias fought beside her, his rifle barking steady, measured shots. He moved with calm precision, shouting orders to the men even as bullets whistled past his head. "Hold your lines. Don't let him flank." Clara caught sight of Cole through the haze, riding low, his eyes locked on her. She knew that look. He wasn't here for the gold tonight. He was here for revenge. When a lantern was struck and burst into flame, the barn caught fire. Heat licked at the walls, the sky above painted orange. The cattle panicked, crashing through the pens, scattering into the night. Clara ran toward the flames, trying to free the trapped animals, but Elias grabbed her arm. "Don't. You'll burn alive." "I won't leave them," she shouted, tearing free. She ducked inside, smoke stinging her eyes, and slashed the ropes with her knife until the last horse bolted free. When she stumbled out coughing, Elias was there, pulling her behind cover just as another bullet struck the dirt beside her boot. "Fool woman," he muttered, reloading. "You trying to make me regret choosing you already?" Even through the smoke, she managed a hoarse laugh. "Told you I'd bring trouble." He smiled faintly. "You did, but I'm not running." As the battle raged, Cole rode closer, firing both pistols, his voice cutting through the din. "Clara, end this now. Come out, and I'll spare the ranch." Elias fired back, grazing Cole's arm, sending him spinning off his horse. The gang leader hit the ground hard, but even then, he grinned. Clara stood, rifle aimed square at him. "It ends tonight, Cole." But before she could pull the trigger, he whistled sharply, and his men lit 2 more torches, hurling them into the main house. Flames burst through the windows. The Cane Ranch, Elias's legacy, was burning. Elias turned, horror flashing in his eyes. Clara grabbed his arm. Go, save your men. I'll handle Cole. Like hell you will. She pushed him hard. Go. For a moment, he hesitated, then ran toward the blazing house. Clara stepped forward into the open yard. Rifle steady, smoke curling around her like ghostly hands. Cole Maddox rose slowly from the dirt, his smirk never fading. Always were too brave for your own good, he drawled. Clara's eyes narrowed. And you always mistook mercy for weakness. They circled each other as the fire raged behind them, sparks lighting the night like stars. The first fight of the war was far from over. But Clara Wren had made her choice. She would rather die fighting for peace than live another day, running from her past. And somewhere inside the flames, Elias Kane swore that come sunrise, the desert would belong to neither outlaw nor ghost. The storm finally broke by dawn, leaving behind a sky bruised and streaked with gold. The Kane ranch was silent except for the creak of windmills and the low groan of cattle, restless from the night. Elias hadn't slept, neither had Clara. Every sound outside her cabin felt like a gun being cocked. When she stepped out, Elias was already saddling his horse. The dark circles under his eyes made him look older, harder. You planning on riding into trouble before breakfast? Clara asked, clutching her shawl tight against the cold. Trouble's already riding toward us, he said. Cole's out there. And after last night, he knows exactly where we are. Clara stepped closer. You think he'll attack? Elias gave a grim nod. He's not the kind to wait, and if he's got men with him, we'll be outnumbered. Before she could answer, a shout came from the north end of the property. One of the ranch hands, a wiry kid named Jesse, came sprinting over the ridge. Smoke, he gasped. North fence line, it's burning. Elias swung onto his horse. Rally the men, get water buckets ready. Clara followed, heart pounding, as the ranch hands tore across the field. The wind carried the smell of burning sage and cedar, and underneath it, gunpowder. By the time they reached the northern pasture, flames had already swallowed the fence. The dry brush ignited like tinder, sending thick black smoke twisting into the sky. And beyond the haze, shadows moved, riders and dusters, circling like wolves. Cole Maddox was here. Elias drew his rifle. Clara, stay back. Not a chance. She pulled her revolver, eyes narrowing. He wants me, not you. Cole's voice rang out from the ridge, deep, smooth, and venomous. Now isn't this a fine sight? The lady thief and her noble cowboy. Through the smoke, Clara could see him, tall, black hat pulled low, a jagged scar cutting across his cheek. His eyes gleamed with cruel delight. Let the ranch burn, Cole, Clara shouted. You'll never get what you're after. Cole laughed. Oh, sweetheart, I ain't after the gold anymore. I'm after you. You stole from me, made me look like a fool. I can't ride into town with that hanging over me. I've come to make it right. He raised his hand, and his men opened fire. The crack of rifles split the air. Bullets tore through the fence and sent splinters flying. Elias ducked behind a trough, returning fire. Get to cover, he yelled. But Clara wasn't running. She dropped behind a fallen log, steadying her aim. Every shot she fired found its mark. She hit one man in the shoulder, another in the leg. Years of running and surviving had honed her reflexes sharper than fear itself. Elias glanced at her between shots. You're not half bad for someone who warned me she was trouble. Guess you didn't listen, she shouted back, reloading. Then she saw him, Cole, dismounting, walking straight toward her through the smoke, rifle in hand, firelight flickering across his face. You can't hide from me forever, Clara, he bellowed. Wasn't planning to, she muttered. She waited one breath, two, and when he came into range, she fired. The shot grazed his arm, tearing through his sleeve. Cole snarled, dropping behind a rock. That all you got? Elias took the chance, moved to flank him, but a shot rang out and hit Elias's horse, sending both sprawling. Clara screamed his name, sprinting toward him as bullets tore the dirt around her boots. Elias coughed, wincing. I'm fine, he gritted out, trying to rise. Blood stained his side. You're not fine, she said, grabbing his hand and dragging him toward cover. We need to fall back to the barn. They stumbled through the smoke as Cole's men pressed closer. The barn loomed ahead, its doors half open. Jesse and two others were inside, tossing water on sparks that had blown in from the fire. Incoming, Clara shouted. Barricade the doors. As they shoved heavy planks into place, Elias leaned against a beam, pale but still alert. We can't hold long, he said. They'll surround us. Clara looked at him, then at the oil lanterns hanging on the wall. An idea formed, dangerous and desperate. Maybe we don't hold, she said. Maybe we burn them out. Elias's eyes widened. You're not setting fire to my barn. I'd rather lose wood than lives. Before he could protest, another volley of bullets hit the door. The hinges groaned. Clara grabbed a lantern, smashed it against the ground, and flames leaped up, spreading fast. Clara, Elias shouted. She looked back at him, her face lit by the fire's glow. You told me not to run, so I'm ending this outside. Cole's men shouted in confusion as smoke billowed. Clara fired through the haze, forcing them back. Elias joined her, teeth gritted, every shot an act of defiance. When the barn exploded in a roar of heat and light, the outlaws scattered. Horses screamed. The prairie burned bright enough to turn night into day, and when the smoke finally began to clear, Cole Maddox was gone, but Elias was bleeding bad, and Clara knew the fight wasn't over. The ranch smoldered under a pale orange dawn. Ash floated through the air like gray snow, settling over blackened fence posts and scorched grass. The fire had died, but the silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. Clara knelt beside Elias where he lay on the porch of the bunkhouse, his shirt torn and bloodied from the bullet wound near his ribs. She pressed a folded cloth against it, her hands trembling. "Don't you dare close your eyes," she whispered. Elias managed a faint grin. "You always give orders like that. When it's life or death, yes," he groaned as she tightened the cloth. The bleeding had slowed, but he'd lost too much already. "You're good at this," he said hoarsely. "Don't tell me patching up gunshot wounds was part of your life before the gang." Clara shook her head. "No, that was my brother's skill. He was the healer. I just learned because I had to." Elias looked up at her, pain dulling but his eyes sharp. "You said Cole took your brother with him when you escaped." Her hands faltered for a moment. "He didn't take him," she said softly. "He killed him." Elias's breath caught. Clara's voice trembled, but she didn't stop working. "We tried to leave one night, take the locket, and vanish. Cole caught us before we made it to the ridge. My brother drew his gun to buy me time, but Cole shot him, and he made me watch." The wind stirred, carrying the faint crackle of dying embers. Elias reached up, gripping her wrist gently. "You've been running from him ever since." She nodded. "Running, hiding, waiting for a day I could look him in the eye without shaking." "Well," Elias said, his voice rough but steady, "you looked him in the eye last night and made him bleed. Sounds like you're done running." Clara's lips twitched into a sad smile. "You make it sound simple." "Maybe it is," he murmured. "Maybe facing the devil's the only way to send him back to hell." Before she could reply, Jesse burst onto the porch. "Sheriff's on his way, boss. Says he saw the smoke from town." Elias nodded weakly. "Good, maybe he'll help us finish this." But Clara's expression darkened. "The sheriff won't be enough. Cole's not gone, just regrouping. He'll come back when we least expect it." She glanced toward the charred ridge. Her instincts screamed that danger wasn't done with them yet. By midday, the ranch hands had done what they could, hauling buckets, rebuilding fences, tending to the wounded. Clara stayed close to Elias, changing his bandages and refusing to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cole's face, the smirk, the hatred, the promise in his voice. "You can't hide from me forever." When the sheriff finally arrived, a stout man named Avery Holt, he looked over the destruction with a frown. "Hell of a fire. You're lucky to be alive, Kane." Elias tried to sit up. "Wasn't luck," he said. "It was Clara." Holt glanced at her, skepticism flickering in his gaze. "This the woman you've been harboring. Heard talk she might be tied to Maddox's gang." Clara stiffened. "I was tied to them, once, not anymore." The sheriff studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Well, if that's true, you're the key to ending this mess. Maddox has 3 bounties on his head and a long memory. You know where he'll go next?" Clara hesitated. "He'll head for the mesas west of Black Spur. There's an old canyon there, used to be his hideout. He'll regroup, maybe pick up more men." Holt nodded. "Then we ride at dawn." Elias's jaw tightened. "You'll need someone who knows that terrain." Clara crossed her arms. "You're not riding anywhere. You can barely stand." "I'll manage," Elias said stubbornly. "Like hell you will," she snapped. "You've done enough bleeding for 1 week." The two locked eyes, her fury against his resolve, until Holt interrupted with a chuckle. "You two done sparring, or should I leave you a ring?" Elias finally leaned back, wincing but smiling faintly. "She's got more fire than the one that burned my pasture." Clara looked away, hiding the ghost of a smile. That night, after the sheriff left, Clara stood outside, under a sky full of stars. The air smelled of wet ash and grass. She could still hear the echo of gunfire, the shouts, the fire roaring in her ears. Elias's voice came softly from behind her. "You could still go. Take the locket, ride far away from here. No one would blame you." She turned, eyes glistening. "And leave you behind, half dead, with Cole still out there." "I've faced worse," he said quietly. Clara shook her head. "No, Elias, you haven't faced him. You don't know what he'll do when he's cornered." He stepped closer, close enough for her to see the gold in his eyes under the starlight. "Then you stay, and we face him together." For a long moment, she just stared at him, this man who had every reason to turn her away, yet kept standing by her. Finally, she whispered, "You'll regret choosing me, Elias." He smiled, just like the first day she warned him. "I already regret waiting this long." In the distance, far beyond the hills, a flicker of light glowed against the dark horizon, the faint spark of another campfire. Cole Maddox was watching, and this time, he wasn't alone. The next morning broke in a blaze of orange and gold. The air was heavy with smoke and promise, the kind that came before a reckoning. Sheriff Holt and his deputies rode out at dawn, dust trailing behind them. Clara watched them go, knowing the fight wasn't over. Elias stood beside her, pale but stubborn as ever, his arm bandaged tight. "You don't have to come," he said quietly. Clara met his gaze. "You're in no shape to ride." "I can still pull a trigger," he said, "and I'm not letting you face Maddox alone." For a moment, she wanted to argue, but she saw it in his eyes, the same fire that burned in hers. This wasn't just about her past anymore. It was about both of them. "Then saddle up," she said. They reached Black Spur Canyon by midday. The land there was raw and cruel. Red cliffs carved by wind, shadows deep enough to swallow a man whole. A narrow pass wound through the rocks, and somewhere beyond it lay Cole Maddox. Sheriff Holt raised his hand, signaling the riders to halt. "We go in quiet," he said. "No heroics." Clara's fingers brushed the silver locket in her pocket. She could feel her brother's memory in it, his voice, his courage. She'd promised him once she'd never run again. Today, she meant to keep that promise. They moved through the canyon, boots crunching on dry gravel. The wind whispered between the cliffs, carrying the faint smell of smoke and horses. Then, from the shadows above, a voice called out, "Well, I'll be damned. Thought I'd have to come find you myself." Cole Maddox stepped out from behind a boulder, rifle resting on his shoulder, that familiar cruel smile spreading across his face. "Drop your guns, boys," he said. "Wouldn't want any more fires today." Holt motioned for his men to hold steady. "Cole Maddox," he called back. "You're wanted dead or alive. I'd prefer the second, but I don't mind the first." Cole chuckled. "You talk like the law means something out here." Clara stepped forward before Holt could stop her. "This ends now." "Cole." He tilted his head. "You sure about that, sweetheart? You took something that wasn't yours." She held up the locket. "It was never yours either. You killed good men for it." "Good men die every day," Cole said, eyes glinting. "Now hand it over, and maybe I'll let your cowboy live." Elias, weak but steady, raised his rifle. "You'll have to shoot through me first." Cole grinned. "Gladly." The canyon erupted in gunfire. Echoes bounced off the walls. Thunder rolling between stone. Deputies took cover, returning fire. Clara ducked behind a rock, heart hammering. Dust filled the air. Bullets whined past her ear. She saw Cole moving along the ridge, trying to flank them. Without thinking, she scrambled up the rocks. Using every ounce of strength left in her dot, at the top, she found him reloading. He turned just in time to see her coming. "You never learn, do you?" he snarled, swinging his rifle like a club. It caught her shoulder, sending her staggering. Pain shot through her arm, but she didn't fall. "I learned one thing," she said through gritted teeth. "You only win when people are afraid of you." She raised her gun and fired. The shot echoed like thunder. Cole stumbled back, eyes wide, the rifle slipping from his hands. He hit the ground hard, dust rising around him. For a moment, there was only silence. Clara stood over him, chest heaving. "That was for my brother," she whispered. Down below, the sheriff's men cheered. The echo of gunfire faded into the canyon walls. Elias limped toward her, relief breaking through the pain in his face. "It's over," he said softly. Clara looked at the locket in her palm, then at the horizon where the sun was breaking through the dust. "No," she said, "it's just beginning." The sun was sinking low by the time they rode back from Black Spur Canyon. The desert wind carried the faint scent of gunpowder and dust, the lingering ghosts of battle. Cole Maddox was dead. His body left for the sheriff's men to haul into town. Justice had been done, but Clara's heart felt strangely hollow. She rode beside Elias, who was pale and leaning slightly in the saddle, but alive. That alone felt like a miracle. Sheriff Holt and his deputies rode ahead. The sound of hooves, steady and somber. "You should be proud," Elias said quietly, his voice hoarse from pain and dust. "You ended what he started." Clara shook her head. "I ended him, not the past." She touched the silver locket hanging from her neck. "There's still a debt inside this thing, and a grave I need to visit." Elias glanced at her, eyes soft. "Your brother's." She nodded. "He deserves to rest, knowing it's over." They reached the Kane Ranch by nightfall. The once blackened pasture now glowed under the moonlight, calm, quiet, and scarred. Jesse and the others had cleared the burned debris, stacking what remained of the fences and barn. The land looked wounded but alive, much like the people who called it home. When Clara helped Elias off his horse, he winced but smiled. "You always did have a way of dragging me through hell and back." She smirked faintly. "You followed me, remember? I told you not to." He chuckled, then winced again. "And I told you I regret waiting this long." For a moment, they just stood there, the air thick with something unsaid. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice quiet. "You could have died because of me." Elias met her eyes. "And if I had to do it again, I would." "You think I'd let a woman fight her demons alone?" That caught her off guard. For the first time since she met him, she didn't have a sharp reply, just a long, trembling breath. The next morning, Clara rode alone to a small rise overlooking the canyon where wildflowers had begun to grow among the rocks. She dismounted, kneeling beside a rough wooden cross. "Her brother's Hey Sam," she whispered. "It's done. Cole's gone. You can rest now." She set the locket at the base of the cross. "This belonged to devils, once. But it led me to people who still believe in something good. Maybe that's what you wanted for me." The wind blew through her hair, and for a fleeting second, she thought she heard his laugh, soft, distant, carried on the breeze. When she returned to the ranch, Elias was waiting on the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand and a half-smile on his lips. "You found peace?" he asked. "Not peace," she said, "but a place to start," he nodded. "Then start here. I could use another pair of hands rebuilding this place and maybe another heart to keep me from growing too hard-headed." She raised a brow. "Is that your way of proposing a partnership, Mr. Kane?" "Maybe," he said, grin deepening, "but only if you promise not to shoot me when we disagree." Clara laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "No promises." Elias extended his hand. Then it settled. She took it, her fingers fitting easily into his calloused palm. The contact was warm, steady, real. For once, she didn't feel like running. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the plains in gold and rose, Clara looked out over the land she'd once thought cursed. It wasn't cursed anymore. It was home. Weeks passed, and the Kane Ranch slowly began to breathe again. Fences were rebuilt, the barn was restocked, and the cattle roamed under wide blue skies that finally felt safe. The land bore scars, blackened posts, scorched patches of earth, but it also bore hope. Clara found herself working alongside Elias every day, hammering, mending, planting. The rhythm of it was healing. She wasn't the frightened fugitive anymore. She was part of something steady, something worth protecting. One morning, she was fixing a gate hinge when Elias approached, hat tilted back, that familiar easy smile on his face. "You've been up since sunrise again," he said. She wiped her brow. The gate was squeaking. "Couldn't stand it." He chuckled. "You're starting to sound like you own the place." She looked out across the pasture, at the golden fields, the distant herd, the sky stretching forever. "Maybe I'm starting to feel like I belong." Elias leaned on the fence beside her. "You do? You've earned that." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the horses graze near the creek. Then Clara said softly, "When I first came here, I thought this ranch would be just another place to hide. But it's not. It's where I stopped running." Elias turned to her, his expression gentle. "Sometimes that's all a person needs, one place that refuses to let them go." She smiled faintly. "You're a stubborn man, Elias Kane. Only when I know something's worth fighting for." Their eyes met, and in that quiet look, everything unsaid between them found its answer. That evening, the ranch gathered around a fire. Jesse played a harmonica, the flames crackling bright against the cool dusk. Laughter filled the air. Real laughter, not the nervous kind that followed a fight. Sheriff Holt stopped by briefly, tipping his hat. Heard Cole's old men scattered for good. "Guess you two did what the law couldn't." Elias smiled. "Guess sometimes justice wears a rancher's boots." When the sheriff rode off, Clara stayed by the fire, gazing into the embers. Elias sat beside her, holding out a mug of coffee. "For a woman who doesn't regret anything," he teased, "you sure look deep in thought." She took the mug, her smile slow and warm. "Just thinking how strange life is. I spent years wishing I could erase everything behind me, but maybe I needed all of it to find this." Elias nodded, eyes soft. "Funny thing about regret, it fades when you find something worth keeping." He reached into his coat and pulled out something small and silver, the locket. Her eyes widened. "Elias, I left that at my brother's grave." He nodded. "You did?" "I went back for it. Thought maybe it didn't belong to the dead anymore." He placed it in her hand. "It belongs to the woman who finally stopped running." Clara's throat tightened. She closed her fingers around it. "Thank you." He smiled. "You could stay here. Make it official. Kane, and..." She raised an eyebrow. "And what?" He shrugged, half smiling. "Haven't figured out what name comes after Kane yet. Guess that's up to you." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "You don't quit, do you?" "Not when I already regret waiting this long." Her laughter softened, and for a long heartbeat, she just looked at him, the rancher who had turned a place of exile into home, the man who saw her not for what she'd done, but for who she'd become. She leaned in, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. "Then maybe it's time I stop making you wait." The wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of grass and distant rain. Somewhere out there, the past still lingered, but it no longer ruled her. Clara hadn't just survived. She had stayed, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. The end.